Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. Now, the former Action SA Gauteng leader, Bongani Baloyi, says he and the party have parted ways because as an established politician, he cannot accept relegation to the position of national spokesperson. Baloyi was speaking to the media yesterday after confirming his resignation from Action SA. Let's get some response from the party now. We're joined by Action SA's national chairperson, Michael Beaumont. Thank you so much for making the time to come through to the studio.
Thank you very much.
There was a lot of anticipation for this eventuality, but what we haven't gotten to the bottom of is these trust issues that the party leader apparently raised with Mr. Baloyi. What was the issue there? What's the content of those trust misgivings?
Certainly. So I think we must understand that the party president has a role in overseeing the provincial chairpersons. Bongani Baloyi had a very important province. Gauteng is the most important province for Action SA, and I don't say that because the others aren't important. I say that because we have a real prospect of being the largest party in a coalition in Gauteng in 2024, and the leadership of the structures towards that agenda is a huge part of Action SA's national strategy. And over time, that relationship has created some strains, and the strains have predominantly been around the question of how the structures are being led, how they're delivering. And it got to the point where Herman Mashaba had to say, look, this is bad, but for the party,
yeah.
There are two leaders who are not talking effectively with one another. I think there's a more productive place to place you in the organization in which we can work for the good of the organization without compromising the 2024 elections.
Give us the extent of the frail strains, those strains that you speak about, because Bongani says the Johannesburg and the Tshwane leadership support him. He consulted with them. So just the extent of the strain and to what extent they can affect the party.
Sure. Well, I can tell you that Herman Mashaba and I met with the Gauteng PEC yesterday evening. And I can say that PEC is united behind this decision. So the extent to which people support him or not, the province is united behind the decision taken and the way forward is the organization. But I think if we're really frank with ourselves, this goes back to an event in October last year. There had been approaches by the ANC to Action SA. Those approaches involved Action SA being offered the city of Tshwane in exchange for us backing an ANC government in Johannesburg and EFF in Ekurhuleni.
Yeah.
And Bongani Baloyi was specifically considered to be the candidate for the city of Tshwane. And from our point of view, that deal couldn't go ahead fundamentally because it was a contradiction with our values and who we are as an organization. We ran a public poll where 30,000 South Africans said, never, we need you to be an alternative with the ANC, from the ANC, and not work with them in coalition. And I think when Herman Mashaba killed that proposal, the relationship with Bongani Baloyi has never recovered since.
So those are the origins of
from our point
the
of
disagreement. But it's kind of confusing to the South African public or the viewer here on the show, where Action SA brought this man onto our screens and said he's coming over to us and he's going to be such a great leader. Where did it go wrong?
It's difficult to trace. In my view, that event in October had a major part to do with it. But, this isn't one of those departures where we're going to try and rewrite history. Bongani Baloyi is a credible young South African, someone whose contributions to Action SA's are appreciated, and we've expressed that publicly as well. We're not going to try and rewrite history in that regard, but the reality, especially in the life of a new political party, is people come and people go, and growing political parties are framed by the idea of more people coming than going. So it's sad to see him
People come
go.
and people go, but perception and optics are very important. When you've brought him in as a leader and you now want him to be a spokesperson, it's kind of understandable why he would take the posture that he has.
Not really, actually, because a spokesperson in Action SA is actually a very senior position. It's described in our constitution. It comes automatically with a seat on Action SA Senate, which is the highest decision-making body.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, this whole idea that this proposal was to silence a person who was regarded to be a critic is absurd, because as you would know, a national spokesperson is the second most public person only to the president, and you don't silence a critic by giving them a megaphone.
But there's seniority questions nonetheless. But just in terms of the situation in the party, we always talk about factions within the African National Congress. Are we starting to have that conversation about Action SA?
Look, it's undeniable. I'm afraid in every political party there's an extent to which that takes place. And when an organization like Action SA forms and starts growing very rapidly, This is one of the growing pains that take place. All you can really do is manage those growing pains and see whether the entity is being decisive in the way that it handles matters, because ultimately, if you look at the political parties like COPE and Achang and others that have fallen apart from once promising starts, I would venture one of the key reasons they fell apart was a lack of decisiveness in how they dealt with their challenges.
Yeah. He says you were in the meeting, not the initial meeting that he had with Herman. I don't know if you were in that one, but the subsequent meeting where he came to give you feedback about not being happy with this offer that's been put on the table. Are you able to give us a sense of the mood in these meetings, just as these very tough conversations were being had?
Well, yeah, I was in both meetings, and I think the mood was, it was a challenging environment. It's not easy having these conversations, but ultimately, when you are leading an organization as Herman Mashaba is, you've got to do the difficult conversations. You don't just get to do it when it's easy.
Yeah.
And I think from that point of view, it was challenging, certainly, and I think yesterday's meeting was something of a foregone conclusion, because we concluded that meeting at around 1:45 yesterday afternoon. And I think within 5 minutes, an advisory had gone out for a press conference that had already been arranged. So I think from his point of view, it may have been a bit of a foregone conclusion.
Yeah. Is Action SA sad to see him go?
Certainly. I mean, I think anyone who says Bongani Baloyi is not someone who can bring value to the organization is kidding themselves.
Considered an asset?
Certainly, and he can. But I think the question is ultimately whether that person will conduct himself within a team sport, which is what politics is. And if an individual is going to play an individual's game in a team sport, an asset can very easily become a liability.
How was he a liability?
Well, I mean, to use the example that I'm talking about, when we had the proposal from the ANC, essentially you had a situation where he wasn't happy with the outcome to not go into coalition with the ANC. And you essentially had a situation where a person's individual ambitions diverged from the party's ambitions. Now, a person who's a team player in that scenario says, look, there was a discussion, the merits were considered, and the party has ultimately decided that it'll go this way. And even though I don't agree with it, I'm a Democrat and I'm not a centralist, as he's been saying.
In fact,
and I'll go
I was
with the
about
decision.
to ask, is Action SA centralizing power?
Well, not at all. I think it's very important to appreciate that Action SA is a relatively young party, and we're on a process of democratization all the time. So where we were 6 months ago to now is completely different, and where we'll be 6 months from now will be even more. But the reality is we have to democratize the organization as we grow. There are still many parts of South Africa that have not yet had Action SA brought to them. And we need to get that right, because we cannot have a situation where the party is being run by 1 or 2 provinces on behalf of the whole country. We need to ensure the geographic voice of South Africa is being felt in the running of Action SA.
So what is the situation? Is he let go of immediately? Is it going to be a process? How does it work?
He announced his resignation from the party yesterday. So it wasn't that he was let go of. He made that decision and he announced that decision, and he announced it in the ways that he chose to, and that's his right. But, Action SA can't wait for anyone. We have a very important project. This project can't stop for any person who leaves the organization. And we continue. Last night we briefed the PEC and had a consultation on the way forward. Funzi Ngobeni,
Everybody's in agreement with the outcome?
Well, certainly. I mean, the meeting was very positive. I mean, everyone being in agreement, I don't know, but the people were very positive about the meeting.
Yeah.
People are clear on the way forward. And people have rallied behind Funzi Ngobeni, who is a very credible candidate for the position and someone who's been instrumental in growing Action SA structures from the very inception. So we believe he's the right man for the job.
Are you worried that he brought with him a certain constituency that's now considering their options just in terms of which political party to go to now?
It's hard to say, and I say that because ultimately we want people to buy into Action SA, not to buy into a person. We're not a cult and we don't have personality politics.
You need the numbers though.
Well, without any question, and every day we're building those numbers. But what is very important about those numbers is those numbers must buy in to a party and a vision and a value and a set of policy solutions for South Africa. And if all they're doing is buying into an individual, then I would suggest they may never have been at home in the party in the first place.
How does this development impact your preparations for 2024?
Well, it doesn't, if I'm very frank with you.
Really?
Well, I mean, to be clear, Action SA is a big political party. We are present in 9 provinces. The activities of Action SA continue every single day. And as we speak right now, Action SA structures are taking our message of an alternative across South Africa to voters on the ground. We cannot afford to let this issue slow us down. and we won't let it either.
And I'm sorry to keep reminding you this, but Bongani Baloyi is a very important demographic, just in terms of leadership aspirations in South Africa. What did it take for the leadership of the party to get to this point where they're like, we're letting him go?
Sure. Well, look, I think the first thing is Action SA is an incredibly diverse political party. And I think Action SA represents South Africa's diversity in so many ways. So the idea that our diversity image or complexion changes
Depends
in any
on one
way
person.
when one person comes or goes is just not plausible. But I think from that point of view, it really did come to the point where the leadership could not engage in good faith and know that we can engage in good faith towards leading the structures of the province. And at the end of the day, it's got to get to a point where if leaders cannot sit down because of a breakdown in trust, something has to give, because the party cannot be paralyzed because of the difference of opinion of one person.
Yeah. Just on another issue, I know you've spoken to some extent with our colleague Patricia Fesache on this. The events in Tshwane, and I know you also wanting to, preparing for 2024, but your bigger presence right now is in municipalities at local government level. Just how have those machinations affected Action SA?
So let's be clear, the look of local government coalition hasn't been pretty. And ahead of
Not at all.
No, that's an understatement. But ahead of 2024, there needs to be a maturation of our coalition politics, because we can't have that level of instability play out at the level of our national economy. That would be a problem. But what I would say is going on in Tshwane is actually quite different from what we've seen before. What we've seen going on in Tshwane is the buying of votes under the cover of a secret ballot. And you've seen a coalition that has a majority working together in a unified manner to resolve that problem. And I would suggest that it's actually been a display for how we can fix those challenges and how we can get back into governing in the interest of the people of Tshwane.
How is Action SA engaging with the fact that the new speaker is an ATM member?
Well, in our view, the election is invalid. You had a situation where 69 votes for the coalition were deemed to be spoiled by the IEC. And you can imagine the difference between winning and losing of those 69 votes. You have an IEC who's...
So the issue of credibility comes in again, which takes all the efforts to build this municipality, takes them back once again.
Certainly, but I think the point is that I think we want to explore litigation on this issue.
Really?
We will be meeting with the coalition at 1 o'clock today. And from our point of view, what the IEC has done is irrational and it's unlawful. From our point of view, I think we must challenge that in the courts, and we must make sure that we can restore this coalition, because this coalition has the majority that the voters gave it. Its majority is being undermined by individuals.
So from the Action SA point of view, what needs to happen in Tshwane for there to be a sustainable solution?
Well, we need to identify individuals who are using the cover of a secret ballot to buy and sell votes. We already have evidence coming forward for which we'll be laying criminal charges within the next day or two, of much of 2 million rand for vote buying going on in that environment. And we need to expose this stuff. We need to identify those behind it. They need to be drummed out of political parties, because while a vote of conscience is a protected legal activity, the buying and selling of votes is not. And we need to expose that stuff. We need to remove people who are guilty of that. And we need to ensure the majority of the coalition was given by voters is restored again.
In all of these machinations, what are the politicians saying about the South African voter who put them there? And in your answer, I'd like you to just incorporate, if you can, what's happening in the city of Johannesburg as well.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the South African politician. What I'll speak on behalf of is the political parties with whom we're in coalition. And we are very mindful that the instability that is playing out at the expense of voters. We don't lose sight of that. It's very disappointing. We think individuals have sold out the 1.3 million voters who, in their majority, asked for this coalition government to remove the ANC and deliver on an alternative. And from that point of view, we see that as a betrayal that needs to be fixed and resolved as quickly as possible, so that service delivery can continue in the city of Tshwane.
Okay, I just want to wrap, but just quickly, how's Herman Mashaba at this moment as the story progresses?
He remains focused on the broader project. I think he appreciates, with his background, that sometimes you have setbacks and speed bumps, and you've got to take them in your stride, but that ultimately the task on Action SA and its leadership to provide an alternative to the ANC doesn't allow for anyone to lick their wounds. We need to get on with our work, and we need to provide that alternative to South Africans.
Well, you have it from Michael Beaumont with Action SA saying nobody's licking their wounds. They're soldiers getting back on the horse and doing the work. Thank you so much for coming through once again. And we were having that conversation about the departure of Bongani Baloyi from Action SA.